This is Evolution Sunday, and I've been sharing messages that use songs and readings from our hymnal as our sacred text. And the one I've chosen to use this time is a hymn called A Firemist and a Planet. So, but first of all, let's talk a little bit about this Evolution Sunday, or now it's called Evolution Weekend. How did that come about, and why did we do that sometimes here? We've done it before when we had the children dance the dance of evolution and other things. Well, the first year of my ministry, I received an email from this man. This is Michael Zimmerman. And he asked if I would sign on to something, a letter, with other clergy of all types supporting evolution, because this was at a time when there was a lot of concern about this. And so he said, clergy need to share that they support evolution. So I did. And we were encouraged not only to sign on to the letter, but we were encouraged to preach about evolution sometime near Darwin's birthday. Darwin's birthday is February 12th. That's also, of course, Abraham Lincoln's birthday. They were born not only the same day, but they were born the same year. So Darwin's birthday is coming up. He called this the Clergy Letter Project. It's gone on now for a while, and we have now more than 16,000 clergy. And he has more than one letter. Now he's divided up. Here's one for Christians, here's one for Unitarian Universalists, here's another for Jewish folks, here's another for others. So we have these letters with all of these names of clergy members who've signed on saying that we honor and support evolution. Now, he has different themes, sometimes that he encourages us to use. We don't have to. The theme this year is the confluence of religion and science. And so because that is the theme, I thought a good song to use the words from and to use the song for our sacred text would be the hymn, A Firemist and a Planet. The words to this are by William Carruth. And let me tell you a little bit about William Carruth. That's his picture. He was born in Osawatomie, Kansas, I hope I pronounced that correctly, on April 5th, 1859. He was someone who taught languages and literature at the University of Kansas and also at Stanford. He was an accomplished poet, as you can see from the song we're going to sing, but most importantly of all, at least to me, he was a Unitarian. He was the president, in fact, of the Pacific Coast Conference of the Unitarian Church. So they had a big separate conference out there when we used to have different districts and those kinds of things in the UU Association. And he was president of that whole district. And his lyrics are the one we're going to feature, and we're going to sing them as well. Now, there are 4 verses to this song. So what we're going to do, we're going to sing a verse, and then I'm going to share with you some aspect of evolution that I think kind of goes along with that verse. Let's sing. So, how did all this happen? The ancients shared a lot of creation stories, didn't they? But their creation stories usually began with the earth, not way on back like we heard with the children. Here's one of them that you may be familiar with.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day.
That, of course, is from the book of Genesis, and that's how many of us learned about the beginning. But we're going to go back before then, as the children did in their story, and look at the evolution of the universe. And we're going to look at that beginning. And of course, in the beginning, at least according to what many scientists share with us now, was the Big Bang. I'm not going to go through and share what we shared about the singularity and those kinds of things that you heard in that children's story. I think you got part of that, and many of you have been learning about this for a long time. But I will say, if you want more than the children's version, I'll give you a couple of recommendations. Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time. And then, of course, I love to listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I try to listen to audiobook because he gets so excited when he shares about all of this. But one he has now is Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. Sounds like us for sure. So all the scientists now, you know, they have some differences, but the great number of them say, yes, it was this singularity got hot and then expanded. There are others who say maybe there was a universe before that came together and then that exploded. We have different ideas about that, but most of them say, yes, there was something like the Big Bang. But where is God in all of this? Where is God in all of this? Well, we have different ideas. We might not, some of us, well, I don't know. Some believers say that God lit the spark. God lit the spark for the Big Bang. Some of those, they then settle back and watch what happened, you know, that clockmaker kind of idea, lit the spark. Others say that maybe God is the spark that started it all. God is the spark that started it all. And then others say that since there was no time before the Big Bang, if that's true, that time was also started at the Big Bang, there was no time or need for someone to light a spark by an intelligent being or a creator. There are other believers, like process theologians, who say they see God in the process itself, that God or the divine is in the process. And then there are those who see no need for a God explanation at all. Perhaps a good explanation, but not a God explanation. Well, you are use. So you decide. Haze on the far horizon, the emerald tender sky, the red ships of cornfields, and wild geese sailing high, and over high and low land, the sharp golden rods, people calling autumn, and others calling God. I'm using this verse to talk about the evolution of nature or of our world, this natural world. Actually, some may say they can go back and see some of that in that old Genesis story, at least metaphorically, when you remember the part that maybe the earth started without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and then the part that talks about land appearing, and then dry land and the creatures that came and the animals. Some may even look at Adam and Eve's leaving the garden as the transition from the hunter-gatherer to agricultural society. So some folks say you could actually kind of use some of that as a metaphor. In any case, the earth itself and all life upon it evolved and continues to evolve. Now the earth, according to scientists, was formed over 4.5 billion years ago, and it has been changing ever since, and still is changing. Here's what happened about 2.4 billion years ago. We know this because of the chemical signatures in the shell. That points to a rapid rise of land that came up out of the ocean about 2.4 billion years ago. And that possibly caused dramatic changes in the atmosphere and climate, and also, of course, made it possible for us to come along a little later. Some of the evolution or changes in the earth are very, very slow. For instance, here Greg and I are on some mules, and the Grand Canyon is behind us. The Grand Canyon started to form about 6 million years ago. So the Colorado River comes by, and little by little. Now, I should share with you all that we just rode around the rim. We didn't go. Greg walked on down in there for a ways, but I walked a little ways and came back up. I didn't go see the very bottom of it for sure. So that was a slow, slow change. And we can see evidence of it, though, by going places like the Grand Canyon. Then some change is very fast. This is an image of the flowing meltwater from the Greenland ice sheet. Data from the NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment show Greenland lost an average of 281 billion tons of ice per year between 1993 and 2016. That's a lot, and that's rapid change. While Antarctica lost about 119 billion tons during the same time period. So they have pictures from up in space that show differences too. The rate of Antarctica ice mass loss has tripled in the last decade, has tripled. So the Earth itself has made a lot of changes. Now, normally when we think about evolution, though, and we think of Darwin wasn't explaining all that. Darwin was explaining plants and animals, those kinds of things. So that's what we normally think about with evolution, and many people explain this by using a tree metaphor, something like this. This is a tree of evolution. Here's one I found. This was obviously drawn by a mammal because the mammal's at the top, right? So, but that's what we do kind of when we draw maps and things like that. You know, why is the northern hemisphere at the top of a map? You know, could be the other way around, but who drew the map, right? Who drew those initial maps? So the same thing, the mammal's at the top there. Here's one who's a little more inclusive. Humans are still way up there, but so are a lot of other things up there with humans. A tree, I think, is actually a pretty good metaphor for evolution because indeed, leaves and branches are dropped off along the way. They become extinct. So it's a good metaphor. Those that are still around, our cousins that are still with us, are the ones that perhaps were able to outrun their predators or maybe could reproduce well. Now, Darwin's explanation bothered many religious folks, as you all know. And the reason it did is because it gave humans common ancestry with other animals. Because we are an animal, it gave us common ancestry, and they didn't like that. But most of us are happy to connect with all of our cousins as long as they don't eat us. But most of us for most of the cousins we have on this tree, though, we are the problem. We are the problem. And if we don't change our ways, this earth will not be habitable for them or us. The earth will last until a giant meteor hits it or the sun burns out in some form or another, but it might not be something we can inhabit. I found as I was studying this lots of scary memes on the internet. I'm sure you've seen those too about what possibly could happen. But I decided not to show you those scary ones. This one's a not so scary one, and it comes from a pretty reliable source, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's showing the sea level rise and coastal flooding impacts, what could happen if we continue the way we are. And in fact, it's already happening in some places. The folks at Tybee can't always get back in, you know. So this provides a preliminary look at what this sea level rise could do in terms of coastal flooding. Those of us in Statesboro, for instance, if you get a house and you get a mortgage, you're not required to buy flood insurance. But you may be, or your children or grandchildren may be. And some of the pictures, of course, are a lot worse than this. But the point I guess I want to make here is if we don't change our ways, we are going to be in trouble, and so will the inhabitable earth. I could say, let's pray this doesn't happen. But I don't think it works that way. Now, there's nothing wrong with praying, it can't hurt, but I think we better pray with our hands and feet and do something about this. And really, we're almost too late to fully recover, but we can recover some. If we want to go back to the Genesis story again, just as you remember, Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden because of their sinful, selfish ways. We too could be cast off of this Garden of Eden earth that we have if we don't change our selfish abuse of this earth. Well, I think with that, we better sing another verse.
Like tides on the sea beach, with moon so blue and thin, into our hearts our yearnings come welling, surging in. Come from the mystic ocean, whose rhythmic foot has trod. Some people call it longing, and others call it God.
So I think of this verse as calling us up to look at the evolution of our souls. The evolution of our souls. How has your soul or your spiritual development evolved? What has been cast aside and what has grown within our souls? Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we have a principle. One of our 7 principles is our third principle. Our third principle encourages members to accept one another and encourage spiritual growth. And while many of us, as we have evolved, as our spiritual growth has evolved, we've dropped by the wayside some creeds or strict doctrines, some of us have. But we recognize that for some, if their soul is like a vine, they may need to have a distinct scaffold in order to thrive well. So we are very accepting and welcome folks to grow and share their growth with us, whether they be Buddhists or Christians or Jews, pagans, humanists, atheists, naturalists, seekers, and more. And yes, we do have all of those among us in this congregation. But my message to you today is to keep evolving. No matter what your particular path is, keep evolving and growing your soul every day. You may not find that perfect mantra. We talked about that in meditation the other day. But tune in. Get past your ego. And I'm preaching to myself now. Get past your ego and evolve your soul. And here's the 4th verse. So I'm looking at this verse to introduce the evolution of society and using evolution as a metaphor for the evolution of society. Let me quickly say, what I don't mean is social Darwinism. That's the theory that individuals, groups, and peoples are subject to the same Darwinian laws of natural selection as plants and animals. This, you may know, was advocated in the 19th and early 20th century by some people and was used at that time to justify some political servitism, imperialism, and racism, and to discourage intervention and reform. So I'm not talking about that. Neither am I talking about the Eurocentric social evolution concepts with the idea that societies progress through exactly the same stages and lead up to what Western civilizations view as progress. Not talking about that either. What do I mean? I simply mean that societies change and adapt, usually from simple to complex, but not always. But hopefully, we improve. Greg and I have been watching on Netflix The Vikings, because we didn't see it when it was originally on whatever network it was on. And as I watched The Vikings, I think, ooh, I wouldn't have wanted to live back then. You know, I think we have evolved towards some good. Actually, there's a book by Steven Pinker called Enlightenment Now. It's the case for reason, science, humanism, and progress. And he says there are 10 ways the world is getting better. So I want to share that with you, a little optimism here. The percentage of the world's population living in extreme poverty has plummeted since 1950. Over 50% of the world's population was living in poverty in 1950. Today, that number is less than 10%. The percentage of the world's population who can read has skyrocketed in that same period. Whereas 36% of the world's population was literate in 1950, by 2010 that had jumped to 83%. And part of that percentage is because now there are countries who before did not allow schools for girls who are now allowing girls to be educated. Homicides and death in war have been decreasing for centuries. Homicides and death in war have been decreasing for centuries. Motor vehicle deaths are dropping, and also deaths from plane crashes and from natural disasters. That doesn't mean we don't have natural disasters, but deaths from these things have been dropping. Life expectancy has been rising. It's been rising over 20 years in the last half century. And clean energy is getting cheaper and cheaper. Hopefully, eventually we'll be able to have some solar energy panels somewhere here. You know, I'm waiting for it to keep dropping, getting cheaper and cheaper. More and more countries are adopting democratic forms of government. Racist, sexist, and homophobic attitudes are becoming increasingly rare. That doesn't mean they're rare, they're just increasingly rare. For instance, despite all the press for white supremacists recently, only 10% of the population now thinks that blacks and whites should not date each other, date one another. Now, if you're my age, you know that has changed and shifted over time. School bullying has decreased. Be better? People are working fewer hours and nevertheless earning more. People in the United States worked 60-hour weeks in the 1800s, but this has steadily dropped to slightly less than 40 hours on average. At the same time, real incomes increased since those good old days, and necessities have become cheaper. I checked with my economist husband to make sure that was accurate, and he says it is. So here are some good changes, some good things that are happening, some good evolving toward the good, I think, toward what is good. So what are the good old days then to which some folks want to return? Well, I had a whole list of them. I could read off to you. I made the list. I've got it here in my notes. But I think you know what some of those things are that folks want to return to. Instead of listing those, I will share this quote to you. This is from a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. It's paraphrased from Reverend Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian. It says, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." It bends toward justice. Now, I believe, and many others do, it's not going to bend by itself, though. It will not bend by itself. We have to reach up and pull on it. It's going to be up to humanity if we're going to have it bend toward justice. If society wants to continue to evolve to peace, liberty, and justice for all, we have to participate. It's our moral obligation. For some, they would say it's God's work. Well, I think that's enough to learn for today, but we're going to close with one more edition. Jane's edition. Here's my verse. Give us the notes and we'll sing this one too, Robert.
Where you come from, or what's your family name? We all have one grandmother. We all are from the same. We'll work to make life better, no matter where we trod. Some call it evolution, and others call it God.
May it be so.